right. Welcome to There is Wisdom in the Building, the first video in a 5-part series on bereavement and grief in the nursing home setting, facilitated by Dr. Toni Miles. The second series is an additional 5 parts on social isolation and loneliness and will be facilitated by the Eden Alternative and Dr. Maureen Mikas. These learning sessions have been created for the WellbeingTREE, or Teaching Resilience to Empower Elders Learning and Action Network, brought to you by Altarum with grant funding from the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. Altarum, a nonprofit headquartered in Ann Arbor, has been in existence for over 70 years. We help federal and state health agencies and foundations improve health equity and outcomes through better systems of care. From lower income children to nursing home eligible older adults, our mission is to help those whose health is negatively impacted by social determinants. We are excited to bring you this collaborative learning platform offering Michigan nursing home leadership, staff, residents, and their families tailored learning to better understand and implement evidence-based strategies to improve social isolation, loneliness, bereavement, and grief that is experienced in nursing home communities. We hope that this is the first of many such educational sessions we're able to provide the residents and staff of Michigan homes. This Learning and Action Network, or LAN, is made up of 10 parts. The first 5 sessions were designed to help attendees to better recognize and understand bereavement and grief in coworkers and residents, better manage their individual experiences with bereavement and grief, as well as to improve ability to help others cope with the same. So why grief and bereavement and social isolation and loneliness as topics for education? Nationwide in 2019, 17% of nursing home residents died. Bereavement in nursing homes is not a new issue with the pandemic, nor will it go away as the pandemic subsides. In 2020, deaths went up to 22%. A combination of COVID-19 and deaths of despair drove this increase. Isolation leading to loneliness, depression, failure to thrive. This is especially common among those experiencing substantial loss and is linked to an increased risk of anxiety and depression. Older adults and those with cognitive impairment are more likely to experience complicated grief. The coronavirus has taken the lives of at least 162,589 residents and 2,913 nursing home staff as of January 1st, 2023, according to CMS. This is why we wanted to provide support by teaching specific strategies to better manage bereavement. And today's collaborator, Dr. Miles' ongoing work on unaddressed loss, grief, and lack of bereavement care that is needed to process morbidity and mortality associated with COVID made her the logical and passionate partner we needed for this topic. In addition to being a national expert on grief and bereavement in the nursing home setting, Dr. Toni Miles is an epidemiologist, researcher, emerita professor, and current Pope Eminent Scholar at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. She has been focusing on population health effects of the deaths of friends and family members for over 9 years. Her best practices in bereavement care and long-term care guide is a reference that was used to inform these 5 videos and can be accessed along with the videos. Welcome, Dr. Miles, and thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Christy, for inviting me. And we're going to walk through our first session. And this is just to introduce people to the idea that you have resources inside your building that can be harnessed early on in the process of helping yourself and others with after the death of residents and others. And it's based on the idea that each building is a small village. This won't be unusual for those of you who are seasoned veterans working in this environment. There is wisdom in your building. There are people who have 5, 10 more years of experience. They've sailed through these waters and they have strategy that work for themselves and others. What we've been doing with these sessions and what you'll see in future sessions is testimonials or advice or questions from people who are watching. Understand we're all distributed online, and so coming together in a learning action network is really really helpful. We're going to start with the following guidelines. If someone says that they are feeling grief about the loss of anything, it's valid. People will talk about losing pets or treasures or abilities. Folks with dementia, before they completely lose their memories, will be depressed because they've lost the ideas. And so there's grief not only from the deaths of people close to us, but there's a whole loss of skills, um, independence that have to be thought of and worked through. And so people who are experienced caregivers know this. They to really come into your own as a caregiver in this set of knowledge, you have to have experience helping others through that dying process, and not just the active palliative care, but the whole pantheon of things that happen. You need compassion so you can see the needs of others. There is a difference between empathy and compassion, but we'll talk about that today. Compassion is what you have to care, but you have to be strong because providing aid to others takes a certain amount of core strength. And that's where understanding your own need to refresh yourself. Sometimes you have to step away, and you'll hear that from folks. What you're going to see is a combination of what I've learned. My team and I traveled across the state of Georgia interviewing people who work inside buildings. We have more than 60 hours worth of interviews. We've talked to everybody, not only the medical staff, we've talked to dietary and housekeeping. Housekeepers have a lot to offer to the conversation. So, bring them in when you can. In addition, we've talked to residents and we've talked to their family members. So we have a 360 view in each of the buildings. We actually went into, my graduate students and I went in different shifts, showed up in the middle of the night, talked to the security guards and the transportation people. There is wisdom in the building because people who do this kind of work are, to my mind, angels. It helps, as one person said, to talk about it amongst yourselves. These are for the workforce that's in the building. You really have to prepare staff and residents when it comes up in strategies that are effective supporting each other. Don't just dump it off to the hospice chaplain or the chaplain that floats through the building. They are there for a reason, but they are not present maybe at all times. So being open and discussing it will not upset the residents. I've been told that often enough. And it helps everybody sort of know what their role is during this process. So here's our objectives for the day. It's pretty basic, but you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that a lot of people are like, I don't talk about, or I don't talk to someone who's newly bereaved because I don't know what to say. We've been told, this is not just me, these are people that we talk to about it. What should we say and what words should we avoid that help people during this time? What are nonverbal things that I can offer, and so it's actions. And the actions for bereaved resident are a little different than what you would offer a bereaved coworker. Because keep in mind, we're all people. We may have jobs, we may work in the special environment, but when you step out of the building, you have lives, you have families, and you can be bereaved in that space too. So this is probably one of the most practical skill sets we all need right now, and COVID has only made that much more necessary. Effective assistance comes when you appreciate or acknowledge what the individual tells you that they need. And so as you move, you're going to take these slides and you're going to move your group through the objectives and encourage people to share their stories. That's how I learned a lot of what I am passing on today. There are, of course, there's things to complain about, things that we could have done better. Call those begs, because you're begging for more resources. But it is also important to balance that out with brags. What did you do during an event that you can see measurably made life better that day? Sharing those stories is foundation for what I now call best practices in bereavement care. So we're going to start because it's really important. What do they tell you on the airplane, for those of you who are still flying, if you need your oxygen mask, you put yours on first before you help the person next to you. Because if you don't, you won't be able to help them. It is important that all of us see that our personal lives can add stress to the job, but you're not alone in this. And so I'm going to show you every video clip you see are people who actually work or live in long-term care, and they've been gracious enough to sit in front of the camera and talk to us.
I lost my dad when I was 9. And about 3 years ago, I lost 4 people. I just got off leave about losing an aunt. And right before I came back, I lost somebody else. I think dealing with grief also depends on your faith and your culture. I'm Caribbean, so we view death totally different. I think then some people who don't view death the same way. Some people think, okay, once you die, you're gone. Some people see it as a rejoicing of life, that it is not an end. Some people see death as, okay, you lived, you came, you died, you're gone, that's it, don't want to deal with it. But see, some people see it not as a funeral, but as a homegoing. Mm-hmm. So there's also your perspective. For those of us who are investigators, case managers, we see a lot of ugly things while people are living. Sometimes we try to advocate for the few days they do have on this earth. It's a challenging job, mm-hmm. and you do need mental health days, I think. You also need
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you need a support system because after you see so much negativity day in and day out, it can impact you physically, emotionally, and psychologically.
It's hard. I lost my mother to Alzheimer's, and so I know, how hard it is and how you want the CNAs to do everything right, like you would do at home. I mean, these family members want us to care for their residents like they care for them. But again, I saw the family side of what I had done all those years. It kind of gave me empathy, and I'll say now, CNAs are the most awesome people in the world, and they have the most important job in the world, and it's a hard job, so it really helped me to appreciate the staff in the facility.
Now, after Dad passed away, he was in room 13, and and I think, and Chap had asked, our administrator had asked, do you think you're going to be okay with this? And I said yes. And so, but after Dad passed away, it was probably a month before I went in that room. It was the very last room on the hall. And I would always find a reason not to go in that room for probably a month. So, but then after a while, then it wasn't his room anymore. So, but it was tough, that part.
In the first set, that was 200 adult protective service workers at a conference talking about this issue in a big forum like that. The last set of videos you saw were in order activities director, director of nursing, and sitting beside her was the chaplain for the building. And so you can see there is a medical side, but it touches so many different aspects of people. So, and they all need to care for themselves. And so the big message, we gave you a little snippet, but the big message is share your grief with somebody you can trust. The director of nursing's building administrator, Chap, asked her, are you going to be okay? And sometimes that's enough, but sharing and not being afraid to ask for help. Someone asks you for help, what shouldn't you say? And at this point, normally I would stop before I listed them and ask what those of you who've had a loss, probably the number one thing you want to tell people is don't say, I know how you feel. Because even if you had exactly the same circumstances, the exact same relationship, folks who are newly bereaved feel like they're alone and they're isolated. And so saying, I know how you feel only makes them angry. Another thing you should absolutely avoid is you will get over it. You don't. Loss is like walking along the beach, right? The tide goes out and you think, okay, my feet are not going to get wet. And then the wave comes back and knocks you over. And you can't really predict when that's going to happen or how it's going to happen. So telling people they'll get over it doesn't get them over it. It only, again, makes them angry. Saying I felt the same way when my fill in the blank died. Everyone feels that grief is unique, and it probably is at that moment. Listen, put a big ear right here and just listen. We have a quote at the bottom.
A few years ago, I lost some keepsakes that had a lot of sentimental value to me. Some of them had been inherited from family, and others were items that I had collected over my life. I don't think that it's reasonable to grieve over physical objects, but I did. I started crying and couldn't stop.
It's important to let people talk. Some people think that's awfully shallow to be grieving the loss of keepsakes, but it's representative of the larger thing or person that you've lost. That's one quote. Here's again another video to emphasize that point.
My somewhat younger cousin and his wife have ghosted me after years of being very friendly and loving, and I have no idea why. And I have tried to find out, but I've had not one word from them since around Easter time, when they just stopped communicating. And this hurts a lot worse than death, actually, because I feel like I've done something to cause it, and I have no idea what I did. I have no way to apologize. I have no way to know what's going on, and that really hurts.
Loss takes on multiple dimensions. To start to think about how to respond in that way, a best practice that's come out of these conversations is any loss you grieve is valid, so that you give yourself permission to grieve. And that grief, like I said, can be broad. I know some people who poke folks who say they are grieving the loss of their pet. And the person who's grieving the loss of a pet will make statements like, "That was my child." They're telling you something about the depth of the grief that they're feeling. And so ridicule is not a good response to that. Not a good response. Go with the validity of it and listen. The giant ear will be your best practice. Now we're going to move from caring for yourself and wisdom in the building, which is the broader context here, how to find someone who knows what they're doing, and how to understand that you are talking to someone who does know what they're doing. Here's what roles you might find experts being. You have colleagues with experience. We've already alluded to that. You can have a bereavement team. I mean, not everybody can help every bereaved person in every situation. That is one of the big challenges for our chaplaincies these days. Having a bereavement team, particularly when someone's actively dying, one piece of advice I got from someone was understand that the CNA who's assisting the family and the person who's actively dying may need to offload some of her other tasks, med distribution, bathing other residents during that period. COVID has disrupted some of those rhythms, and a lot of what you're hearing are based on interviews that we did before COVID, but they're worth thinking about and maybe modifying to adapt to the new environment where the volume of people dying is ratcheting up. But having a team of people who have a plan for helping the staff caregiver when a resident is actively dying is the point here. And then sharing, oftentimes before 2015, there was no requirement to share a care plan with the direct care staff. A CNA would walk into a room and might find a resident has died and not know what to do, not know what the resident's wishes are. So now it is a requirement that everyone who touches the lives of a resident knows what the care plan is. Well, some participants in the care team are still human and they respond to the passing of that person. And so Knowing from the care plan that they are actually doing what the resident wanted helps to begin their road to bereavement care. But let's see what people actually have to say for themselves.
Well, I think it's hard to tell someone. We do try to educate, and we have publications, and they're always a help. Little snippets of advice. Doesn't have to be earth-shattering, just, common sense things. But no matter how much you tell someone, I don't think they really get it, like Donna was saying earlier, until they do it, until you go through it yourself when you lose your first resident, and then the second, and then, but just telling them your past experience, giving them the booklets, we have hospice to come in and talk, the chaplain, I think all of that, but I think it's the experience. You never get, it never gets easy, but you can handle it a little more easier, I think.
Sometimes you do have to step away. Like, I can handle it for maybe the first 15 minutes, but then after that, maybe I need to say, hey, Jennifer, I need you to go in and talk to this family. I just can't do it anymore. Maybe it's not a good day. But rely on each other and be able to talk it out. Like the CNA that had the experience with death but still very uncomfortable with it, we sat out and we just talked about it. And, then it led to another conversation, going to nursing school, So she was able to kind of build on that. Just, I guess, supporting each other.
So these comments seem simple. Some people would call them common sense, but as my grandmother was fond of saying, common sense ain't so common, is it? Dying ear, listen to one another. Best practice, bottom line, create a plan to support grieving coworkers. This, in the subsequent conversations, we'll talk about what that means to execute a plan to support grieving coworkers. It's not always just a few days off. Typically what we do is a lot of places will give you 3 days, depending on the relationship with a family member. Another friend of mine says, people don't die, they leave a mess. There is the role, bereavement often requires that we step into the lives of someone we care about and on a continual basis for as much as a year, taking care of odds and ends. And that should be incorporated into any care plan that is created by a place that employs people who are working in long-term care. And there's a lot of debate about that, but as you go through this slide in particular, you should talk about that, because it's not always just being able to travel to wherever to attend a funeral. Lesson, continuing our conversation about wisdom in the building, first we talked about ourselves and our coworkers, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to take care of a resident. And as you're watching this slide, hopefully you're not watching it by yourself. But if you are, think of, before you dive into these pieces, think of personal experience or stories, or have someone who's with you have a story about this piece with residents. I have found all of my experience with death and dying is based in the hospital. But as I moved out into long-term care, nursing home, I got a different perspective. By telling these stories, you will share that perspective with the people in your group.
I remember walking through the dementia unit to visit my wife and seeing several patients just sitting silently. Then I saw a CNA pick up a puzzle, set it up, and start to work on it. Patients came up and asked her what she was doing, and she invited them to help her. This was a great way to get them involved in an activity.
So this is the voice of a spouse whose wife is in long-term care. This is a adult community, and he's in the independent living side of things. And so his perspective is out here, but he sees what staff do to care for his wife who had dementia.
Of course, people want to say something because the silence is uncomfortable, but sometimes silence is what you need. sometimes just being present and not having to fill the space with any words is sometimes best, especially if you don't know what to say.
One of the things I did, I would come at 8 o'clock every morning. I'd be with her, and we would have coffee together. It wasn't as meaningful day after day to her as it was to me, but at least she knew I was with her, and they gave her a wonderful care, and I was interested in seeing that she played games. We would play games. I would play games with all of them, and she would play, and we enjoyed putting puzzles together, smaller puzzles.
One way to do it, here's another piece of advice. Bereavement care practices, and you should know the First Lady actually works in the building and had a loss during the period we were doing our interviews. And the second gentleman had a wife in long-term care. He lived in assisted living. So bereavement care, when you're caring for a resident, it's not just the resident. There are many people around the bed who also will need your attention. And so those of you who organize the way folks work have to build in time for this extra level of care. You don't just have one patient, or you have multiple ones for each resident. So the best practice here is that you don't have to say anything sometimes. I had a music teacher who said sometimes you have to be like a dog. You just kind of sit there close by, providing a quiet presence. Talk is not always needed. Shared activity puts you in the same flow, for those of you who know about flow. And that's as caring, sometimes that's just enough at that moment. We have a quote here about caring.
When a neighbor dies and I see the family come in, I try to sympathize, but I never say, I know just how you feel. I really hate when people say that. Everyone experiences death differently. I also try not to say, she's in a better place or anything else that's religious, because you never know what other people's beliefs are.
Yeah, and that, whether you are staff working or one resident taking care of another one, or just working out in your community, it is really important to understand that everyone is different, that religion, that some people find comfort from religion and others don't. It's about as plain as I can say it.
I think some of the most challenging phrases have been where someone would say, God needed that person. First of all, I'm not expert on what God needs, but secondly, it just kind of creates this lack of personalization. That's probably been one of the most challenging, or those phrases.
Don't let them be secluded. Go knock on their door, ask, can you come in, sit down, talk to them. Ask the family members to bring in photo albums or personal pictures, memorabilia, things that mean something to them. Make their living space homey. Things that are their favorite piece of furniture or whatever that means something to them. If it's possible, bring it into their room. Bring them out to activities. Take them out. Spend some time with them. Just don't let them stay idle in their room and not coming out, because then depression could could seep in, and you don't want that to happen.
Our speaker makes a really excellent point. It is human contact. And part of the reason why after we're done with this segment on bereavement and grief, you're going to get the loneliness, the discussion about loneliness and isolation. Because often after a loss, the person becomes isolated, either because they've lost their best connection in the world, or they become angry and they push people away. It takes a thick skin to keep coming back when someone says, go away, I don't want to be bothered today. But it's really important to persist. Quick story, because I like to tell stories too. We went in to interview a thoracic surgeon who was now in his late 80s and a resident in a long-term care facility. And he didn't want to talk to us. There's nothing we could teach him, nothing he could say to us. And so with a little bit of gentle prodding, a little bit of, well, so what's your experience? What would you like to talk about? How do you think about this? He finally opened up, and we must have chatted with him for 45 minutes. People, even angry, old, grumpy men will talk to you if you give them the time and space to do it. And sometimes you just have to sit there quietly so that they get uncomfortable with the silence and try to fill it. And sometimes you have to circle back, the check-in process, but anything that works. And so the best practices for caring is, here's some words you can say. I am sorry for your loss. You can say that to anyone who's had a loss and mean it. You can offer to do stuff for them. I'm a coffee fiend, so bring your coffee. Bring me some coffee and maybe you'll get more conversation and I'll feel less isolated. Some of the larger communities that we visited have a group of dedicated volunteers who go to visit people that they know who are bereaved. One suggestion I would say, if you go that route, which I highly encourage you to do, have people go in pairs. That way you have one set of eyes to watch an interaction, because stuff happens. But these are all best practices that will facilitate caring for folks who are bereaved. And you'll learn a lot. Objective 4, we're going to focus now. All of those other tactics were for people who actually live resident in the building. Now we're going to talk about coworkers. COVID has opened up this whole venue of healthcare workers who are bereaved. We still don't have good strategies that we recommend. And I will tell you, this is very like what was happening in the healthcare industry during the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s. We had a lot of healthcare workers who just saw lots and lots of young men die of a terrible disease. Healthcare workers are not made of stone. We're human beings before we go to medical school, and hopefully we're human beings when we come out. So here's some actions that you can tailor for the healthcare workers in your environment, from the medical directors in the building all the way down to the CNAs, or up to the CNAs, I should say, because the CNAs rule. First of all, how do you know you have a coworker in distress? You look for signs of it. They might be needing extra smoke breaks. They may be lower energy than you're used to seeing in them. They may be angry or irritable. There's all kinds of ways people manifest their stress, but if you see a change, think that they might be bereaved, because often that's what happens. And then there are specific ways to help. The giant ear, some people should make a giant ear and pass it around. I'm wearing the ear today. Talk to me. Offering to complete a task, that gets us back to the idea of a bereavement team. And sometimes just exchanging responsibility. There are people who argue that if you're caring for someone with dementia, you shouldn't sub out that care team. But sometimes the carers, the caregivers need that offset. I'm not the only one who has ideas. Here's another tape for you.
One of the things that I try to encourage staff members and everybody, and even family members, to experience your feelings. Your feelings are natural and normal, and they're valid. Sometimes they are in conflict. Sometimes it doesn't seem like they're, right, but they're your feelings and they're natural and normal. It's important to give expression, full expression to them, but at the same time know that what you're feeling, someone else is probably feeling it too, and just sharing with each other. And staff is usually very good about taking care of each other.
Too often, especially historically, people who work in long-term care were told, you'll get used to it. You'll get over it. You'll get, you won't be as bothered by your feeling about the events that are happening. Number one, you don't want people working in the building who don't feel it, at least a little bit, because that means they don't care as much about their job or the people they're caring for. The other thing, though, is losing your humanity. Sometimes it's very, very human to be angry about something that happened or to feel guilty that, you didn't do everything you could have done. I mean, the feelings are not just in one little space. They're a gambit of feelings. And so it really does help if you can feel comfortable listening to a coworker express their feelings about someone they just lost. Because as Reverend Connie, who's the chaplain for that building, retired naval officer, submarine captain, he knows what fear feels like. And I think fear is at the bottom of all of this. So the best practice in caring for coworkers is be a good team member. These days, it's become difficult to be part of a team because we've all been isolated in our little hidey holes, 6 feet of distance because of COVID, all of that being protective of being from getting infected, and all the spacesuit gear that we have to wear, the personal protective equipment, makes it a little harder to feel connected to another human being. So that's going to require, and this is me speculating, it's going to require a little more work at team building, not just ropes courses and that kind of stuff. Some efforts, the things we used to do to build teams were things like breaking bread together. Sooner or later, we're going to have to get back to those kinds of things because that builds the bonds that can be mined during this care process. So be a good team member. I've just about completed all the material I want to show you today. Hopefully all those Georgian accents were clear. I think so. These people are very articulate and very, they get their points across. When you sit down and reflect on what you've just seen with this and subsequent videos, I would encourage you to think about how you and your group can pick from what you've seen today to enhance your ability to support one another and bereaved residents. Bereavement is a fact of life, particularly so in the nursing home setting. It can be tough, but people who choose to work there are the angels in our society. We need them. We need more of them. What can you do to help one another is what you're going to think about and talk about as time goes on. Thank you for your attention. This is the beginning of sharing what I've learned from others who work and live in these spaces. Next session, we're going to do a little more deep dive into how you care for yourself as staff, because that's where it begins. I mean, one of the things I learned as a resident is I couldn't take care of my patients who were dying of all kinds of things until I understood what it was doing to me and cared for myself. That's where we're going to go. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Miles, and we hope to see all of you in the next video on caring for yourself.